Okay, so the component life cycle. A component instance has a life cycle that starts when Angular instantiates the component class and renders the component view along with its child views. The lifecycle continues with change detection as Angular checks to see when data-bound properties change and updates both the view and the component instance as needed. The lifecycle ends when Angular destroys the component instance and removes its rendered template from the DOM. After your application instantiates a component or a directive by calling its constructor, Angular calls the hooks method you have implemented at the appropriate point in the lifecycle of instance. Angular executes hook method in the following sequence. There are eight lifecycle methods: ng on changes, ng on init, ng do check, ng after content init, ng after content checked, ng after view init, ng after view checked, and ng on destroy. Okay, so we'll see these eight component lifecycle method one by one. First, ng on changes. Uh, this method responds when Angular sets or resets data-bound input properties. The method receives a simple changes object of current and previous property values. This method runs before ng on init and whenever data-bound properties changes. Then the second is ng on init. This method initializes the component after Angular first display the data-bound properties and sets the component's input properties. Then third is ng do check. This method detect and act upon changes that Angular can't or Angular won't detect on its own. Then the fourth is ng after content init. This method responds after Angular project's external content into components view. Means this method responds after Angular projects external content into the components view. Then the next is ng after content checked. This method responds after Angular checks the content projected into the directive or a component. Then ng after view init. This method responds after Angular initializes the component's view and child views. Then ng after view checked. This method responds after Angular checks the component's view and child's view. And the last is ng on destroy. This method clean up just before Angular destroys the directive or a component. Well, the next is directives in Angular. Directives are classes that add a new behavior or modify the existing behavior to the elements in the template. Basically, they are used to manipulate the DOM. For example, adding and removing the elements from DOM or changing the appearance of the DOM element. There are different types of directives in Angular: component directives, attribute directives, structural directives. And there are some built-in directives like ng model, ng class, ng style. Also structural directives like ng if, ng for, ng switch. As we can see here, we have used here ng class directive, ng style directive. We have used this ng model directive here, and then we have used this structural directive. Structural directive start with this star sign. Okay, so the next part is how to create our own attribute directive. So here we have created our own app highlighter attribute directive, and for that we have created this class app highlighter class, and we have decorated that class using directive decorator, which takes selector property, and we have written this app highlighter, which is the name for our this app highlighter directive. Then we have injected this element reference service to access that specific element. So to create a directive, we need to access the HTML element on which the directive is getting applied. For that, we will inject element ref dependency using the constructor in our class. So here we have two different example of custom directive. One we are using as a attribute directive, and the second we are using as a uh, class directive. Then we are going to see this host binding and the host listener directives. Sorry, host binding and host listener decorators. These two decorators in Angular that can be really useful in custom directives. uh, host binding Host binding lets you set properties on the element or a component that hosts the directives. And the host listeners lets you listen for the events on the host element or the component. So here in our example, we have created a color change directive and used in a paragraph element. Like this, we have created this directive and used in our paragraph element. So what will happen here? So paragraph has initially red color, and when user clicks on paragraph, it will change color to blue. Here the host binding decorator will assign the style attribute to the given element with color red, and host listener listen click event of a given element and executes the handle, which result in changing the color to blue. Like this, we have created this color changer directive class, and we have decorated it using at the red directive, and we have given the name for this directive as a color changer. And in this class we have written one host binding and one host listener. Host binding uh, used to change this style dot color using this color variable, and the host listener will listen to this click event on the host element, and it will execute this event handler when user clicks on that host element. Okay, so the next is pipes in Angular. Pipes are used to transform strings, currency amounts, dates, and other data for display. Pipes are simple functions to use in a template expression to accept an input value and return a transformed value. For example, here we have used uppercase pipe. This transform small my name string to this capital my name string using this uppercase pipe. Angular has some built-in pipes like date, lowercase, uppercase, as we have used here this date and this uppercase pipe. So like here we have mentioned some built-in pipes: date pipe, uppercase, lowercase, currency pipes, decimal pipe, percent pipe. Okay, so we have used here this date pipe, and uh, how we will pass the arguments to a date pipe. So the answer is using this colon, and if you have multiple arguments for a single pipe, will use the colons to separate the arguments to pass that pipe. Also, we can use multiple pipes for a single value using this pipe operator. Like as we have used here, we have used date and uppercase pipe for the single value birth date.